show. Well, it's very intuitive to think that, the difference between something being a metal or a gas would have to do with, how massive the atom is, of course. Right, so it's more to do with, like, the way the atoms can arrange themselves, more than, like, their mass, right? Yes, oh, of course, that's quite right. But it's very surprising. It's very easy for us to think that, oh, of course, gold is such a dense thing, and of course it's a metal because it's got, so many, protons and electrons. It's got quite a massive particle. There we are, we have a metal. But, we look at something like a radon gas, and it's got 86 protons. It's almost double the mass of something like silver. But one of them is a gas and the other is a metal. And this is all about geometry and their abilities to stack, into big molecules that have a particular geometric arrangement, and that this geometric arrangement is what gives, all of the characteristics that we're actually familiar with. Yeah, it's kind of cool to think about, really. That it's all really geometry. That kind of dictates, what something is, like whether it's a solid, liquid, gas, everything like that, right? Quite right. I find it quite fascinating. And, but beyond that, it's, things like, we ask, why is a piece of glass clear, and a piece of gold is not, for example. And again, it is all about the electrons, right? Well, what's the deal with that? Why is glass clear and gold is not? Now, in the case of glass, like every electron is accounted for, in the molecular structure. It's a very crystalline, rigid molecular structure. There aren't any free-floating electrons around to interact with the photons of light coming through. Okay, but gold has extra electrons. Right, as all the metals, in fact, have extra electrons that, float around, kind of like a force field, electromagnetic energy, It's all quite fascinating. And it is these free-floating electrons that will interact with a passing photon and absorb them and not let them pass right through. Okay, but in glass, all the electrons are very rigidly stuck together and they can't interact with the photons, so they just pass through. Quite right, and that right there is the difference between glass being clear and, gold not. Also, the difference between something being a metal or a gas, or a liquid, solids, all of these things. It is not about how massive the atoms are, as we clearly see. All of life, and the properties are all very much about geometry.